Good evening, and welcome to the AJP Northeast Asia Market Close. Artificial intelligence exposure split the region sharply today, with Korea suffering a broad semiconductor sell-off, Japan falling on heavy losses in technology-linked names, and Shanghai holding in positive territory through optical networking and energy stocks. The clearest theme across Northeast Asia was not simply risk-off trading, but a widening gap between markets with concentrated artificial intelligence exposure and those finding support elsewhere. Korea took the hardest hit. The KOSPI fell nearly 6% as selling spread from the country's two largest memory chip makers into the wider electronics supply chain. Japan also closed lower, with SoftBank Group and Advantest weighing on the market. Although fast retailing moved against the decline, China was the exception. The Shanghai Composite was still trading slightly higher, supported by gains in optical networking companies and offshore oil producer CNOOC. The contrast suggests that investors were not rejecting technology across the region. They were cutting exposure most aggressively where expectations and positioning had become most concentrated. The KOSPI closed down nearly 6% at around 5,663, losing roughly 360 points. The scale of the decline shows that the pressure was broader than a single disappointing stock. SK Hynix, one of the central names in the global artificial intelligence memory trade, fell nearly 10% to around 1,401,000 won. Samsung Electronics dropped more than 5% to around 208,500 won. The weakness then spread deeper into the supply chain. Samsung Electro-Mechanics, which supplies high-end electronic components used across smartphones, servers, and other technology products, fell more than 8% to around 1,023,000 won. That pattern matters. When the market leader, its largest domestic peer, and a major component supplier all fall together, the move is no longer a narrow reaction in one company. It becomes a broader reassessment of the valuation and positioning built around Korea's semiconductor complex. Shanghai moved in the opposite direction, although the market was still trading at the time of this briefing. The Shanghai Composite was currently up about 0.3% at around 3,825. The strongest evidence came from optical networking shares. Zhongji Innolight was currently up more than 4% to around 946 yuan, while Eoptolink was up nearly 4% to around 423 yuan. Both companies sit closer to the communications infrastructure supporting data centers and high-speed computing than to the memory chip trade that drove the Korean sell-off. CNOOC was also currently up more than 0.5% to around 31 yuan, adding an energy counterweight to the technology gains. China's market was therefore not escaping weakness through a broad rally. It was holding up through a selective combination of communications hardware and energy, which gave Shanghai a more balanced structure than Seoul or Tokyo. Japan closed lower, but the internal split was just as important as the headline index move. The Nikkei 225 fell about 1.5% to around 61,417, down roughly 957 points. SoftBank Group was the sharpest drag among the names provided, falling more than 7% to around 4,707 yen. That made it the clearest Japanese expression of pressure on high-beta artificial intelligence exposure. Advantest, a major semiconductor testing equipment supplier, fell more than 2% to around 24,925 yen, reinforcing the weakness across chip-linked shares. But fast retailing moved against the market, gaining more than 1% to around 80,950 yen. Its rise matters because it shows that investors were not selling Japan indiscriminately. Money rotated away from the most volatile technology exposure and toward a heavyweight consumer name capable of supporting the index even as the broader market declined. So the day's message was not a uniform retreat from technology. It was a repricing of concentration. Korea, where semiconductor exposure dominates the index, suffered the deepest fall. Japan declined as its artificial intelligence proxies weakened, but consumer strength provided some balance. China held positive through optical networking and energy stocks. The open question is whether today marks a short, violent reset in the region's artificial intelligence trade, or the beginning of a broader rotation away from its most crowded names. We will be back tomorrow to track whether Korea's semiconductor sell-off stabilizes, whether Shanghai can hold its gains into the close, and whether Japan's rotation away from technology continues. For daily Northeast Asia market coverage, please subscribe. Thank you for watching AJP.